Welcome to Shapiro Industries. Today we are going to be making the Blades of Chaos. First, what you want to do is you want to sketch out your design. I just kind of like free-handed this from images that I found off the internet. So just kind of find a sketch, and then what you're going to do is with that template, draw it onto foam and then begin to cut it out. I would say that try to keep a sharp blade constantly because it will allow you to get much cleaner cuts. If you have to sharpen your blade like mid-cut or like just constantly keep swapping them out, but a sharp blade is what's going to have a better end product. And for really tight cuts and like really detailed, I would say use an X-acto knife if you think a box cutter is a little bit too big. But here, like, we just cut out the bottom of the blade, so now we're going to fit it with the top of the blade. Now, I'm using these really small kind of like puzzle piece floor mats because that's all that I had at the time. But by all means, if you could cut this out of one big piece of floor mat, do so. It'll save you a lot of time and you won't have to cover the seam like I will show you later on. But right now we're just cutting out the blade, and yeah. Another thing is on really long cuts, you want to make sure you have a sharp blade, but also that you're applying constant and consistent pressure across the entire cut. And as I said earlier, for these tight cuts, you could bend the foam a little bit if it makes it easier to cut, but just make sure that the cut goes all the way through. So here we're just fitting the two pieces together. And as you can see, it fits, and now we're going to have two of them. So we're gonna work on gluing these two pieces together. Now, I did make the mistake that you should have flipped over the template. I did not do that, but it ended up working out later on. So right now we're just gluing it together. I use hot glue. Many people use contact cement, but since I was inside for the day and I didn't want to have to prepare for the fumes of contact cement, I decided to just use a really strong hot glue because contact cement will give off toxic fumes and it is not good. So when in doubt, use hot glue. It's safer, but you do run the risk of burning your hand. But just keep your hand away from the hot glue and you should be fine. And I would advise to put some masking tape on certain parts like I do on the top of the blade. It'll just make it easier to hold together. Now we're cutting the handle out of a wooden dowel. Pretty much any wood will do. I just thought that a wooden dowel would be easier because it's already round and the handles are round for most of the different forms of the blades. And we're just using a Dremel. When you're using power tools, always use them with caution. We don't need anybody getting hurt, so use it with parent supervision or just have your parent cut it. You don't need a Dremel for this. I just used it because that was the best way for me to do it, but by all means you could use a hacksaw or just like a lot of sandpaper and a lot of sanding if you need to. Now we're just cutting a paint stirrer to kind of act as an expansion piece for the top of the handle that's going to fit inside of the foam blade. And we're just going to fill that cavity with hot glue and then stick our handle in and then fill in some of the extra pieces with foam. And you want to apply a lot of pressure here. And to keep the rigidity of the blade, what I ended up doing is I carved out sections on each side of the blade and inserted that paint stirrer. On the other blade, this is the second one that I made, but on the first one, I had actually put a coat hanger on the inside of it, which gave it extra rigidity. Now, if I found that if you do it this way and glue 2 paint stirrers onto the sides, it's actually a stiffer blade, which I thought was better. So, you learn from your mistakes. That's what this channel is all about. But I would definitely say, like, if you remember this step, put the coat hanger in the center, and if you want like a super stiff blade, you could do both. But I actually found that this method seemed to work. And we're just kind of carving it out with a craft knife, slowly but surely. You could also use sandpaper if you want to sand it down, but like hacking away at it with a craft knife will get the job done. So once we have a fully carved out channel, what we're going to do is fill it with hot glue. As you saw, I flipped it over, but that's just because I was working on the other side now. So you're going to fill the channel with hot glue, and then you're going to insert your paint stirrer, press it down, put a little bit more hot glue to really seal it in. And now this is 2mm craft foam, and what I'm doing is I kind of drew like an inside. So this is the part of the blade that's not going to be beveled. This is going to cover the paint stirrer. So I'm just sketching out the design on 2mm craft foam. I'm going to cut it out with a pair of scissors, and that is going to be what covers the paint stirrer. Now this can be any color. It doesn't have to be blue. As you saw, I was using blue and yellow floor mats because we're going to end up painting this. It does not matter what color floor mat you use. And once again, we're just applying it with some strong hot glue to make sure that it stays on there. And we're flattening out with a ruler if you want. You don't have to. I just find that if you do that, it prevents the kind of lines from showing from the hot glue, which you don't always want. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. But now we're going to work on the bevel. So just taking a craft knife and cutting at about a 45-degree angle. Like, it's not super precise. It's kind of just like eyeballing it. And this is where a lot of the definition from the blade comes, because it really, this is the beginning process of it turning into the finished product. So we're just carving away at it. You don't want to cut past kind of like the seam, because then you're working into the other side's bevel. So I try to keep it on that one piece of foam. If you're a little bit short, it's perfectly fine, because we're going to sand this later. And once again, always be safe when you're using sharp objects, and be careful because this is a sharp blade. And now we're outside because sanding foam is very dangerous, and always use protection. So I've got, as you see, glasses and a mask that will prevent me from inhaling the particles of foam and getting it in my eye. So we're just sanding away at it. I believe this is a 60 grit wheel. I might be wrong about that. You want something fairly coarse because we are taking off still a lot of material. We're not really working on the smoothing part of it yet, but you can smooth the piece out with this. It should all depend on like how much pressure you apply. So just take it slow, because working with power tools, especially with foam, which can rip and get stuck, it's dangerous and it could hurt the project. So just take it slow. And as you can see, all the kind of like blue powder that's going onto my hands, that's just foam. So now what we're doing is we're just building up kind of the overall shape of the sword. So this is just kind of gluing on random pieces until the shape starts to come together. And for those of you that don't know, I'll probably put a photo somewhere right about now, but this is what the blade looks like. And it's kind of like that dragon's head, or like dragon's skull that we're going for right now. So I'm just trying to build up the shape. That way when we wrap it in a thinner foam later, it looks better. Now, for this blade, you don't have to use craft foam. By all means, you can use pretty much anything. I've seen people make it out of wood. Some people make it out of like an expanding foam as opposed to a floor mat foam. And you can even make this out of plastic in theory, or metal. Metal is dangerous, but I mean, like craft foam, it's affordable and it's a very useful prop making tool, so that's why I use it. Now, I didn't start off in craft foam. I actually started off in paper and then making stuff out of cardboard. And just recently I've started to get into craft foam work. And as you can see on the side of the blade, it kind of has those squiggly lines, which I was trying to avoid. So now we're just cutting more material out of 2mm foam, and we're just trying to build up the shape, as I said. Cover any like mistakes that we made, because everybody makes mistakes in projects. This is more 2mm foam. We're just cutting some strips to wrap around the back. I would definitely say try not to cut foam that you just attached with hot glue. It can be difficult, and if the glue hasn't fully set, you're going to get hot glue all over your scissors. I made that mistake, but I try not to do it so often. And now we're just cutting down some more foam and adding it to the back and kind of wrapping it. And that's how you're going to get the kind of like scaled look that the blade has. Now, as I said earlier, there are many different versions of this blade from the video games. It pretty much changes almost every game that is released. And since I was making this for a friend's birthday, like as a present, he didn't really care. He just said, like, I want the Blades of Chaos. So I took the artistic liberties and just kind of made my own design. So right now we're taking just basic hot glue sticks, carving them down a little bit, and then sanding them. And this is going to be kind of the teeth of the dragon. Many other people use this type of like foam clay that sets, but I didn't have any of that, so I just used what I had on hand, which was hot glue sticks. I use a lot of hot glue on this channel. So we're just carving them down, clipping them down with some wire cutters, and we're going to start gluing them onto the blade. I tried to stagger them so that the bigger ones are towards the center, because that is what is on most blade designs. Other ones, it's just kind of like all like snaggle teeth, but there are many that are kind of like organized patterns of teeth, so I was just trying to match that. And to kind of get the look of like the gums of the dragon, we're going to cover the bases of those hot glue stick teeth with craft foam and hot glue. And we're just wrapping more hot glue around it. And by now you should be able to start to see the beginning of like the kind of the dragon's head, and we're just filling in some more spots, like anything that we missed from our design, cutting it out of craft foam and gluing it on. Now, since I am assuming that if you're going to make this project, you would be making 2, in my experience, I find that the second one I make always seems to be better. So I would just say prepare for that, because you're going to learn from your mistakes on the first one and apply that to when you build the next one. And I definitely did that for this project and many other projects. It's kind of a trial and error thing, so you figure out what doesn't work and then you figure out what does work. And as I said earlier, it really does not matter what type of craft foam you use. You also don't have to use like specifically floor mat craft foam or like 2mm craft foam. Craft foam comes in a variety of different sizes, and right now we're just wrapping the handle because the handle does have a wrapped leather look, and since I didn't really want to have to wrap the handle in leather, I'm using this method where you just glue thin strips together and wrap it around the handle, applying hot glue to pretty much all of it. And the overlapping really gives it a kind of wrapped leather look, especially after we paint it and we put some clear coat on it. It will look like leather. Now this piece on the bottom is just kind of the pommel. It was just a scrap piece of foam that I decided to glue on. And this was much better than the other one because on the other sword's pommel, it was an actual piece of sink faucet that I used, which can be dangerous if you're going to swing it around. So right now I'm just carving in some ruins, I guess it would be considered. They kind of all change from blade to blade, so I'm just kind of like freehanding it and doing what I think looks good. So you can do the same thing if you're building it, just kind of see what looks good and do that. Put some eyes on the dragon if you want to. It's an extra detail work. And what we're going to do with this is craft foam and floor mat foam expands when you heat it up. So I'm going to be showing you how to do that. You use a heat gun. In past experience, I have used a hairdryer before. Oh, and right now I'm just fixing a piece because I drew the eyes on for the dragon. Weird. So I just glued it right on top, and as you see there, I'm shrinking the foam with a heat gun, and I'm doing it on the rest of the blade now. And you want to keep it moving because after all, we did use hot glue to put this together, and that heat gun does get to heat where it can melt the hot glue, and you can see kind of in the corners where the thin craft foam is rising up. We can fix that with a little bit of hot glue, but in the end, it really is not going to matter. It's just going to add character to the blade. Like I said, you could just re-glue down pieces that raised up, and that is pretty much the blade. So now we're going to prime it with this primer. I would always say get a good primer because that is what your paint job is going to be based on. So I would say 2 to 3 coats, and you don't have to cover the entire blade. As you can see, I kind of missed the edge, but I knew I was coming back with more detailed paint work, so I just figured to fill it in there. So right now we have this, I believe it's called gunmetal silver. I'm not entirely sure. It's a very metallic paint. I picked it up at Joann's, I believe. You can pick them up pretty much anywhere that sells craft paint. There's a lot of different types, but you want to go for a good metallic. And here we have a metallic gold. I believe it's the same company. And yeah, just gonna apply the gold pretty evenly across the dragon head part. And you want to make sure, like, I'm using a brush, but many other people use kind of like foam brushes or sponges to apply paint. I just used what I had on hand, but you can use whatever you have on hand too. I just thought that it would be easier for this size brush to get this type of detail work in. So now what we're mixing up is kind of our weathering liquid. So that's just water and some black acrylic paint that we're mixing together, and we're just pouring it on and then rubbing it off with a tissue or a piece of paper. And what this is going to do is it's going to get rid of that shininess that the other paint left, but it's not going to take away too much from it. It's going to give it character. So now what we're doing is we're just taking an eye hook and bending it around a piece of plastic chain. I picked up the plastic chain from Amazon. I believe it was like $10 for 10 feet, if I'm correct. And what you're going to do with that eye hook is you're just going to screw it into the base of the handle, because the handle is wood and it's going to make a pretty strong connection. I didn't glue it in because I wanted to leave my friend the option of taking the chains off, so I ended up doing that. And as you can see, this is the final product right here. Leave the video a like, comment, subscribe, share the video. If you thought that anything I said here was helpful, by all means, please help the channel grow. Share this with as many people as you can. And yeah, see you guys in the next video.